Welcome back to Central Colorado Ballistics. My name is Wally. In 1934, the United States passed its first federal firearms law, the National Firearms Act. Machine guns, short barrel rifles, suppressors. For the first time, certain firearms required federal registration and taxation. But the story did not stop there. The years that followed would reshape the relationship between citizens, states, and the federal government. War, economic upheaval, and the growing struggle for civil rights. All of it would influence how firearms were viewed in American society and how they would be regulated. After 1934, firearm regulation began shifting increasingly toward the federal government. 4 years later, Congress passed another major law, the Federal Firearms Act of 1938. The legislation focused on commerce, not possession. Manufacturers and firearm dealers were now required to obtain federal licenses. Records of gun sales had to be maintained, and for the first time, federal law prohibited firearm sales to certain categories of individuals, including convicted felons. The federal government was no longer just taxing certain firearms. It is regulating the marketplace itself. And in 1939, the Supreme Court addressed the law directly. In the Supreme Court cases United States v. Miller, the court upheld the National Firearms Act, linking the Second Amendment to the concept of a well-regulated militia. Virginia did not dramatically expand firearm restrictions during this period. But the Commonwealth did begin aligning its laws with national models. Virginia had already addressed machine guns the year before, with the 1933 law passed during the gangster era. What followed in the decades after was refinement, not reinvention. In 1950, Virginia adopted the Uniform Machine Gun Act. This legislation required machine guns within the state to be registered with the Virginia State Police. Dealers were required to maintain records, and possession of a machine gun for aggressive or criminal purpose became a serious felony offense. Rather than inventing new regulation, Virginia was now participating in broader national legal framework. While lawmakers debated regulation, the nation itself was at war. World War II mobilized millions of Americans. Factories that once produced civilian goods began manufacturing rifles, pistols, and machine guns. Millions of American soldiers trained with firearms during the war. And when they returned home, that familiarity with weapons came with them. A similar pattern followed the Korean War in the early 1950s. Veterans returned with experience in firearms and military training. Across the country, shooting sports and hunting traditions expanded. By the late 1950s and the early 1960s, another force began shaping the national conversation, the civil rights movement. Across parts of the American South, some activists argued that armed self-defense was necessary to protect civil rights workers and local communities. Groups such as the Deacons for Defense and Justice organized armed patrols to defend against violence and intimidation. In many communities, firearms became a tool of protection for civil rights workers facing violence. These debates over rights, both civil rights and firearm rights, were becoming intertwined. By the mid-1960s, firearm policy was once again becoming a national political issue. Rising urban crime, a series of national assassinations, including President John F. Kennedy, and civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., and rising public anxiety, all would push Congress toward another sweeping law. Even organizations like the National Rifle Association, which had supported earlier federal regulation, were beginning to resist broader national controls, one that would dramatically expand federal authority over firearms. That law would arrive in 1968. Between 1934 and 1968, Virginia did not radically transform its firearm laws. Instead, the Commonwealth adapted to growing federal framework, a framework shaped by war, economic change, and the national struggle for civil rights. But the next turning point was approaching, a moment that would permanently reshape American gun law. The Gun Control Act of 1968. Freedom secured, rights defended.